This is a true life story. On what began as an ordinary morning at Utah Valley University, thousands of students gathered for a political event. They expected debate, controversy, maybe even heated arguments. But no one expected violence. By midday, the campus would become the scene of chaos, fear, and tragedy. A single gunshot that changed everything. Charlie Kirk, a 31-year-old conservative activist and co-founder of Turning Point USA, stood at the center of it all. Known for his fiery debates and his ability to draw both admiration and criticism, Kirk was no stranger to confrontation. But on this day, his words would be cut short in the most brutal way imaginable. What followed was a frantic fight for his life, a desperate search for answers, and a mystery that left a nation reeling. The morning of September 11th, 2025, began with the rhythm of campus life. Students walked to class, professors prepared lectures, and the courtyard at UVU buzzed with anticipation. Banners for the American Comeback Tour fluttered above rows of folding chairs. For supporters, this was more than just another campus visit. It was a chance to see Charlie Kirk live, challenging ideas head-on, unfiltered. Kirk's reputation preceded him. To some, he was a fearless defender of conservative values. To others, a provocateur who thrived on controversy. His "prove me wrong" style had become a cultural flashpoint. Crowds came not just to listen, but to argue, to confront, and sometimes to expose. That mix of admiration and hostility was exactly why security was tight that day. 6 uniformed campus officers were positioned strategically among the crowd. Kirk's wife and children sat nearby, guarded by private security. Over 3,000 people had gathered, one of the largest audiences the university had ever seen. Phones were already live streaming, social media buzzing with hashtags, and everyone waited for Kirk to take the stage. At 11:50 a.m., Charlie Kirk walked to his table, microphone in hand. Calm, confident, he settled into his role, sparring with students, dismantling statistics, cracking jokes, and turning every question into a debate. This was his arena. For the audience, it was entertainment mixed with ideology. Cheers, jeers, and applause filled the air. But less than 30 minutes later, the courtyard would erupt in terror. At 12:10 p.m., Kirk leaned forward, engaging with a student about one of the most divisive issues in America: mass shootings. When a student asked, "Do you know how many mass shootings have taken place in the last 10 years?" Kirk's answer was simple: too many. The crowd responded with applause. And then, the sound that would end it all. A single gunshot tore through the courtyard. Sharp, hollow, immediate. For a moment, time seemed frozen. Was it a prank? A firecracker? A stage stunt? But as Kirk's hands flew to his neck and blood poured from the wound, the grim reality sank in. This was real, deadly real. Screams erupted. Students scrambled in every direction, some ducking to the ground, others sprinting toward the edges of campus. Security rushed the stage. One agent pressed a cloth against Kirk's wound, shouting for medics. Campus officers called for backup, sealing exits and trying to control a panicked crowd. Kirk's wife and children were rushed away under armed escort, their faces pale with shock. Witnesses claimed they saw movement on a nearby rooftop, a shadow, a fleeing figure, something they couldn't fully describe. But no one knew for sure. The only certainty: Charlie Kirk was down, and his life hung by a thread. Inside the ambulance, the atmosphere was frantic but focused. Every second mattered. Medics worked with precision, their hands moving quickly in the cramped space as the siren wailed above them. One paramedic kept pressure on Kirk's neck wound, his gloves soaked in blood. Another called out vitals into the radio. Pulse thready, blood pressure dropping fast. The ride lasted only 4 minutes, but for those inside, it felt endless. Every bump in the road, every sharp turn seemed to echo the fragility of life slipping away on that stretcher. Charlie's breathing grew shallow. His eyes flickered open for a brief second, as if searching for something or someone, before fading again. At 12:18 p.m., the ambulance screeched to a halt at Utah Valley Regional Medical Center. Waiting at the doors was the hospital's trauma team. Doctors, nurses, and technicians ready for battle. The doors flung open. Male, 31, gunshot wound to the neck. Massive blood loss, unstable vitals. The EMT shouted as Kirk's stretcher was wheeled inside. The trauma room lit up with motion. Bright lights overhead cast everything in harsh clarity. Gloves snapped on. Monitors beeped. A surgeon's voice rang out. "We need blood, type O stat. Airway secure. Let's get a line in now." Kirk was barely clinging to life. His skin was pale, lips turning blue. His pulse, faint, irregular. One nurse immediately started chest compressions as another prepared the intubation tube. The sound of the ventilator filled the room as they forced oxygen into his lungs. Blood transfusion bags hung overhead, dripping into 4 lines. Technicians called out numbers as vitals flashed on monitors. Heart rate dropping, pressure unstable. The room moved like a machine, but beneath the precision was urgency and fear. Everyone knew the truth. The wound was catastrophic. The bullet had torn through vital tissue, and stopping the bleeding was nearly impossible. Surgeons worked to clamp the arteries. The operating table became a battlefield. Sponges soaked red within seconds. Scalpel, suction, clamps. Every tool was in play. One nurse later described it as controlled chaos. Orders were shouted. Hands passed instruments in rapid succession. For a moment, there was hope when the bleeding slowed, but then alarms blared. Kirk's heart had flatlined. Code blue. Compressors moved in, pressing rhythmically on his chest. A doctor shouted, "Epinephrine, 1 milligram now." A syringe pierced the 4-line. The seconds stretched, and then a faint beep. The heart monitor sputtered back to life. A collective breath filled the room. He was back, but only barely. Minutes later, his vitals plummeted again. Another code blue. More compressions. More drugs. And again, a flicker of life. This cycle repeated again and again. Each time they pulled him back, each time weaker than before. In one fleeting moment, Charlie's eyes opened. Those who saw it said it was haunting, a glance that seemed to carry both awareness and surrender. His lips moved faintly, as if he wanted to speak, but no words came. Then his eyelids fell shut once more. Hours passed. The battle dragged on. Every available resource was poured into saving him. Surgeons rotated out, fresh hands taking over. Nurses whispered encouragement, even when they knew he couldn't hear them. "Stay with us, Charlie. Stay with us." But the human body can only endure so much. By evening, the exhaustion was visible on the faces of the medical team. Sweat poured down foreheads, scrubs were stained with blood, yet no one stopped. At 10:07 p.m., after nearly 10 hours of relentless effort, the monitors told the story no one wanted to face. The flatline was unbroken this time. No flicker, no return. The lead physician stepped back, removed his gloves, and with a heavy voice said, "Time of death, 10:07. Silence fell over the room. The noise of rushing footsteps, clattering instruments, and shouted orders gave way to stillness. For the doctors and nurses, politics no longer mattered. In that moment, he was not a figure on TV, not a controversial activist. He was simply a patient they couldn't save. They bowed their heads for a quiet moment before leaving the room, one by one. Outside those walls, his wife and children waited, surrounded by security and staff. They had clung to each update throughout the day, holding on to fragile hope. But when the physician entered, his face alone told them everything. Words like "we tried everything" and "I'm sorry" broke the fragile silence. His wife collapsed into sobs, clutching their children as the reality sank in. For the family, the world had shifted permanently. For the country, the news would soon break, igniting a firestorm. But inside that trauma room, all that remained was the weight of failure, the echo of machines that no longer beeped, and the memory of a fight that ended in silence. When news broke inside the hospital that Charlie Kirk had not survived, the ripples spread outward like shock waves. Within minutes, those ripples reached the campus where it had all begun. At Utah Valley University, The courtyard where the shooting occurred was no longer a bustling space filled with debate. It had been transformed into a sprawling crime scene. Yellow tape cordoned off the area. Folding chairs, once arranged neatly for the audience, were scattered in disarray. Some knocked over during the stampede, others left behind with belongings still draped across them. Backpacks, phones, and notebooks lay abandoned, silent reminders of the chaos that had erupted just hours earlier. Police officers moved carefully among the debris, photographing the scene, marking evidence with numbered flags. Forensic teams swept the rooftop of the nearby Loy Center after multiple witnesses swore they had seen movement there. Snipers, drones, and tactical teams scoured the building floor by floor, but no suspect was found. The university went into full lockdown. Students huddled in classrooms, libraries, and dorms. Many texted frantic messages to their families. "I'm safe. I don't know what's happening. They told us to stay inside." Parents gathered outside the gates, demanding answers. Confusion reigned, fueled by rumors. There was more than one shooter. They caught someone. They haven't found anyone yet. None of it was clear. Inside Utah Valley Regional Medical Center, the Kirk family's grief was unbearable. His wife, pale and trembling, held their children close as the weight of the doctor's words sank in. For hours, she had clung to updates, hoping the surgery might stabilize him. But now there was nothing left to hold on to. Security escorted the family into a private wing of the hospital, away from reporters who had already gathered outside. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward, journalists shouting questions. Is Charlie Kirk alive? What happened inside the trauma room? No answers came, only silence and tears. By evening, the news cycle had erupted. Every major network cut into programming with the same words. Breaking news: Charlie Kirk shot at Utah Valley University. Clips recorded by students on their phones flooded social media. Shaky footage of screams, the moment security swarmed Kirk's body, the rush of students scattering. Hashtags like hashtag Charlie Kirk shooting and hashtag UVU tragedy trended globally within the hour. Commentators filled the airwaves. Supporters expressed shock and outrage. Critics, though cautious, acknowledged the tragedy. Across the political spectrum, leaders condemned the act, calling it an assault not only on one man, but on free speech itself. As night fell, vigils began to appear. In Provo, hundreds of students gathered with candles in hand, their voices carrying hymns into the cold September air. Posters and flowers lined the gates of UVU, messages scribbled in marker, "Gone too soon." Violence is not the answer. Rest in peace, Charlie. In other cities, rallies formed. Some were solemn, moments of silence held in Kirk's memory. Others turned into heated protests, with political banners raised and chants echoing through downtown streets. To supporters, Kirk was a martyr for free speech. To critics, his death was tragic, but also symbolic of the volatile climate America had descended into. Meanwhile, investigators faced mounting pressure. The FBI quickly joined local law enforcement, bringing federal resources into the hunt. Dozens of agents combed through witness testimonies, video footage, and rooftop evidence. But the puzzle was incomplete. Security footage was inconclusive. Eyewitness accounts conflicted. Some swore they saw a gunman on the rooftop. Others insisted the shot came from ground level. No shell casings were found in the courtyard. The weapon, nowhere to be seen. Despite the chaos, one fact stood unshaken. The shooter had vanished. In the days that followed, Utah Valley University struggled to recover. Classes were canceled. Counseling centers overflowed with students shaken by the memory of screams, blood, and fear. Professors described empty lecture halls and students too afraid to return. The courtyard, once a hub of life, became a place of mourning, lined with candles and flowers. The university's president addressed the community, her voice breaking as she said, "This campus will never be the same, but we will not let fear silence us." Across the nation, the reaction deepened. News anchors debated endlessly. Was this political violence? Was Kirk targeted because of his beliefs? Or was this the act of a lone extremist? Conservative leaders called it an assassination, a warning shot against those who dared to speak freely. Liberal voices condemned the violence just as strongly, but also warned of escalating rhetoric and division fueling such acts. For days, America seemed consumed by one question: who pulled the trigger and why? The Kirk family released only a brief statement: "We are devastated." Charlie was a father, a husband, and a believer in his country. "We ask for privacy as we grieve this unimaginable loss." They retreated from the public eye, choosing silence over spectacle. For them, this was not politics. It was personal. A husband gone, a father taken. Weeks later, the investigation remained murky. No arrests, no weapon recovered. Theories ran wild online. Was the shooter a student? A protester? A professional assassin? Conspiracies filled the void where answers should have been. For UVU, the scars remained. Some students transferred. Others carried nightmares of that single gunshot. Security on campuses across America tightened overnight. Every political event reevaluated. Every speaker now viewed as a potential target. Charlie Kirk's death had left more than an empty stage. It had left a nation unsettled, a family broken, and a university forever marked by tragedy. And then came the hardest question of all: why Charlie Kirk? Some pointed to his role as one of the most visible conservative voices in America. He had made a career out of confrontation, sparking heated debates wherever he went. To his supporters, he was a champion of free speech. To his critics, he was a provocateur. Did that visibility make him a target for political violence? Others wondered if the attack was personal. A disgruntled student? A lone extremist seeking fame? Without a suspect, the motive remained buried. The unanswered questions spilled beyond law enforcement into the national conversation. For some, Kirk's death was proof that America had reached a breaking point, that political differences had escalated into open violence. For others, it was a grim reminder that rhetoric and polarization could push people toward the unthinkable. But no matter which side of the divide people stood on, one fact was undeniable. Someone had fired that shot, and they were still out there. The lack of answers fueled endless speculation. Online forums buzzed with theories. Some argued the shooter was a trained assassin who had planned a clean escape. Others suggested a government conspiracy, silencing Kirk for reasons hidden from the public. Fringe voices claimed the shooting was staged, a hoax meant to manipulate public opinion. The truth was lost in the noise. Each theory added another layer of confusion, another distraction from the simple, haunting reality. There was no closure. For Kirk's family, those unanswered questions were salt in the wound. They wanted justice, but justice requires answers. At UVU, students carry their own scars. For them, the shooter wasn't just a mystery. It was a shadow that lingered every time they walked across campus. Was the gunman still among them, watching? Waiting? And for the nation, the shooting left a deeper fear. If a man as high-profile as Charlie Kirk could be gunned down in front of thousands, in broad daylight, surrounded by cameras, police, and security, then no one was truly safe. It wasn't just about who pulled the trigger. It was about what it meant. The fragility of public life. The reality that one gunshot could silence a voice forever. So, the questions remain. Who was the rooftop figure? How did the shooter disappear without a trace? Why was Charlie Kirk targeted? And perhaps the most haunting of all, will the truth ever be known? Charlie Kirk's death was more than the silencing of a single voice. It was a mirror held up to America. A mirror reflecting anger, division, and a culture where debates too often cross the line into hostility, and hostility too often tips into violence. For his supporters, Kirk was a symbol of courage, someone willing to say what others would not. For his critics, he was controversial, confrontational, and at times inflammatory. But beyond politics, he was a husband, a father, and a son, a man whose life was cut short in front of thousands. The tragedy at Utah Valley University forced the nation to confront a sobering truth. The stage of ideas is no longer safe. Words that should spark conversation now carry the risk of bloodshed. Campuses, once places for learning and exchange, have become battlegrounds for ideology. And yet, despite the noise, the questions remain unanswered. Who was the shooter? Why did they target Kirk? How could someone fire a single shot in broad daylight and vanish without a trace? Those questions may never be answered. They may live on in rumor, in speculation, in the haunting silence left behind. But the memory of that day, the gunshot, the chaos, the desperate battle for life, will remain etched into history. It was the day politics turned into tragedy, the day a university became a crime scene, the day America lost one of its most polarizing voices. For his family, the loss is personal. For the country, the loss is political. For history, it is a reminder of the fragility of life and the consequences of division. Charlie Kirk's story does not end with neat answers. It ends with a question mark, a shadow, and a silence that still lingers. And sometimes in true crime, that silence is the loudest sound of all. The day that began with debate ended in death, and the questions left behind may never be answered. What do you think really happened that day? Was it political violence or something else entirely? Share your theories in the comments below. We read every single one. And if this story gripped you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next case we uncover. This is True Crime Tapes, where the truth is always stranger than fiction.